As a player, when you main a faction, you develop blind spots for certain units, and this is something I've talked about in videos in the past. But in general, I would say as an Empire main, Mortars are not a unit I find myself using often, just because with my playstyle, I often don't take a lot of artillery, or if I do, it's mainly like one kind of anti-cav slash anti, counter-artillery piece, which the cannon fulfills that role just fine. And, on the interrupted line of sight maps, I tend to take the flashier rockets, but the lowly mortar at 650 points is a great cost-effective spend if you can get the ammo expenditure on the right units. It doesn't have the best armor-piercing damage in the world, but I'm up against Kafka, actually, on ladder, and I have to give Kafka credit here. This is beautiful artillery positioning. He's got his mortars, like, kind of behind this little back slope here, the cannons up on the front slope. And this map, Storm Demon, is interrupted line of sight, so my bolt throwers over here are going to have a hard time. I kind of positioned them over on this side so I could potentially get around and try and get in a counter-artillery fight, without having to get too close, basically. My intention here was just to push forward and kind of leave these guys back. I'm playing Archmage here, who's currently going after Kafka's Karl Franz. He's got a couple of Demigryph Knights, Jade Wizard, the 2 artillery pieces, Silver Bullets, front line of just swordsmen. Interesting. I would maybe mix in a couple of spears here personally, but that's just my own take. The infantry meta is a little bit real right now, so maybe I kind of get that as well. Yeah, my high Archmage with her nasty eagle that can get stock flew in, cast a little Tempest there on Karl Franz, did some decent damage to him. Honestly, probably should have waited on that until I had some follow-up opportunities with maybe some missile units or something. Shoot them with the bolt thrower, but right now the mortar's just been firing in this whole time, doing some great work on the spearmen, and that's kind of the ideal targets. The lighter armor, the better. But these kind of mid-armor units, spearmen at 40 armor, all the way up to even Silver Guard at 75, is still going to get very effective damage from the mortars. I'm going to switch my bolt throwers just to shooting the Demigryph Knights. I'm like, you know what, they're the most high-value targets I can shoot. I've actually got a couple of Lothern Sea Guard here, push forward, trying to shoot the artillery pieces. We're going to focus the Hammer of Witches, because again, it's the more expensive target, but Kafka responds, putting the mortars directly on the things that kind of threaten them, which is definitely a great move. These Empire Knights also just totally broke up my advance, did a great job kind of with the mortar damage coming through, just cleaning house. Did take a lot of damage from those white lines in the process, but just the disruption is excellent here. And another great pop, little rear charge from Karl Franz. These Silver Guard, decent armor. Normally they would trade pretty well with the Sigmar Sons, except I definitely should have braced rather than charging with that expert charge defense. But yeah, nice rear charge with Karl Franz. In the meantime, kind of running some harassment here with these Illyrian Reavers. My intention is if I can keep all of his cavalry busy, I don't really need to protect the artillery pieces, right? So now, trying to draw these Demigryph Knights into a position where I can outnumber them. Side and rear charge, with the Reavers, and continue to fire with the bolt throwers. We could potentially win that engagement. Also throw in these white lions for some support, but yeah, the Hammer of Witches took a lot of damage. Didn't actually destroy any of the pieces, unfortunately, and the mortars also are completely healthy here to keep firing. But we'll kind of keep them in the background as some other stuff happens. Karl Franz getting another Tempest as he charges down. A little bit of heal will help counteract that. Also hits those Demigryph Knights who are at full models, so it's a nice efficient heal there. Yeah, great job also. Manages to get these Demigryph Knights up and around, and the Empire Knights rallied. Did not allocate any resources to chase them off. Also totally forgot I have this Deathcaster here with just terror, basically, that I've completely forgotten. It happens occasionally, but we do manage to catch the Demigryph Knights with this kind of Reaver blob here. Unfortunately, the Empire Knights do come in and shut down the other bolt throwers, so definitely rough stuff there. Kind of starting to lose options for shutting down these artillery pieces, and especially the mortar. Considering how cheap it is, you can see I'm kind of vainly firing. I think I'm actually firing at Karl, but some of the overshots hitting the mortars. Probably actually should be shooting the mortars, but yeah, let's see where are those shots actually landing down. I think maybe overkilling those Lothern Sea Guard a little bit there, but just making sure they're really well and truly dead. Yeah, and I do switch back over to the Hammer of Witches, actually, with this other one. Prioritizing that target as I don't want it pressuring my Lord is kind of the main thinking for me. I mean, I have the stock item, but also miscast damage is pretty real if I'm going to be spamming Tempest. Karl Franz is close to his healing cap, so I've been able to do effective damage kind of over the course of the battle with that. Kafka's been good with his healing, efficiently, getting Franz to his healing cap there. I think with primarily just Earthblood. He does have regrowth as well, okay. Yeah, must have been a regrowth in there that I missed in the cast. We do damage 2 of the pieces, though, of the Hammer of Witches, so I switch over to the Mortar. But I just don't quite have enough left in the tank at this point to really shut it down. And also, again, I switch over to Franz. I see he's at his healing cap, so I'm like, you know what? If I finish Franz here, I can potentially win on leadership. So I'm going to actually switch there instead of continuing to fire on the Mortars. Also, keep in mind the Silver Bullet's completely healthy and firing this whole time. Try and get a little bit cheeky here and snipe out the Jade Wizard, but a whole bunch of Demigryph Knights in play here. Still got relatively healthy White Lions pushing up on this flank as well, so I can kind of screen through them. It wasn't super risky, but I did take some damage there. Also, just in range of the Silver Bullets, I'm going to pop that stock item again, kind of move away, or just Arcane Conduit, actually. There's the, yeah, Armor of the Stars, that's what it's called. In the meantime, Bolt Thrower is completely shut down. We are still beating this Demigryph Knight slowly with our 3 Reavers, which is not exactly cost-effective for me, but it's okay. It's not terrible. The other Demigryph Knight, though, in the front line here, actually chewing up these Lions. The Lions will fight back pretty well, but these are the Lance Demis, who I've evangelized on many cases as being better than the Halberds. And this is a big reason why, is they're much better in this type of a situation, especially if they get a good charge. Carl comes in with the Terror, and the White Lions run for the hills. They're in a pretty desperate situation there anyway, and yet those 2 artillery pieces, I mean, the Mortars especially, let's come check back. They've kind of just been firing in the background the whole time at various targets here, but yeah, value-wise, 1100 damage value, which is cost-effective for them. I mean, 1300 is, what, double value for them, so that's great. Again, another nice little kind of multi-charge here on these Silver and Guard, who are relatively healthy. But definitely, Kafka did a great job of kind of breaking up my rush here. Getting my units piecemeal, which is what the Empire needs to do. It's kind of one of their main strategies, since they focus so much on the charge damage. Speaking of which, I'm going to drop in again with the Archmage and try and get a little bit cute. Again, do some rear charge damage and then come in with the Reavers. Reavers slightly mistimed, though. I do take just 1 hit from Franz, enough to terrify her at the health she was at before. And that immediately leads to everything else getting terrified, and it's basically army losses at that point. I've now realized I do have this Deathcaster who's been forgotten, but yeah, it's pretty hopeless. So, credit to Kafka, man, played it beautifully from the Empire side, and I have to give him props, because it's, yeah, this is very, very strong build. He played it well, you know, using the terrain to his advantage and everything there, so great stuff. The Mortars at the end of the day, 91 kills, 1300 damage value, so just what I said, double up on that 650 cost to bring them. If you can keep them protected, especially on an interrupted line of sight against the right targets, it can definitely pay for itself. And Elves generally present good targets, all 3 of 4 Mortars, in that they have relatively expensive units that are lower HP and lower armor, lower HP especially, but the High Elves kind of have the best armor situation, right? And I even brought many of those units here, kind of their mid-tier infantry, 80 armor for the White Lions, I believe, 75 for the Silver and Guard. We'll double-check that, but yeah, I mean, they generally fare better than Wood Elves and Dark Elves in that regard, and still just got shredded by the Mortar. Demigryph Knights also didn't necessarily pay for themselves, but did decent with shock damage, you know, rear charges and so on. Hammer of Witches actually didn't end up getting all that much value, which is why I'm highlighting the Mortars here. Silver Bullets did, though. I mean, missile units, you can see with the damage valuations that a lot of the time, the units that are actually dealing the damage are your missile units, right? Shock Cavalry also fulfills that role to a large extent. Carl as well. Didn't get all that much value. I was definitely trying to control him as best as I could with the, the Archmage, who kind of got some inflated value there from doing a lot of damage to healing Carl. Or to Carl while he's being healed, rather, I guess. Yeah, the Death Mage was totally forgotten. Just a complete waste. Some of the White Lions did okay. Some of the Silver and Guard did okay. Bit of a mixed bag on the infantry. The one Lothern Sea Guard that hung around until the late game used up all their ammunition also did excellent value. Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers didn't quite make up what they needed to. Need a little more time to fire at the Demigryph Knights, I think. But yeah, the Mortar, I have to say, was the main thing that really impressed me. And during the battle, too, I was thinking to myself, like, man, I just cannot shut this thing down. And it is actually doing damage to me. Like, the Mortar, the reason I don't use it that much is just, again, kind of my own play style. I tend not to do a lot of artillery. On interrupted line of sight maps especially, though, the Mortar is a great option. And against factions which are lower armor, like, I wouldn't recommend it necessarily against, you know, like strong rush factions. or armor factions, which is like obviously Warriors of Chaos are both of those things, but even like Norska, Beastmen, some of the other, you might think, light armor factions, if they're rushing you, the Mortar's not going to have enough time to pay for itself. It does need time to use its ammunition, but if it has that time, it can definitely pay for itself against the right targets. That's why I say the Elves generally, because of their low HP and lowish armor, they definitely present some good targets for Mortars. Dwarfs I would definitely recommend against. They're not going to do a lot for you there. Greenskins, it can kind of depend. A lot of Greenskins players will actually want to try and stand and shoot with, like, you know, Doom Divers and other artillery pieces. It's a thing I've been seeing recently. In that case, it might be okay, but also Greenskins can play a very strong rush, so you have to protect again there. Lizardmen, kind of the same thing. Also, Lizardmen, I mean, against Skinks, it's okay. Saurus, I'd have to see. It's probably pretty decent there, but yeah, kind of the Elves are, I would say, the best bet. Also against something like Coast on an interrupted line of sight map, definitely. They can't counterfire you with cannons. These guys can do a lot of damage to the zombie infantry because they're pretty slow. They advance slowly and everything if they have to advance to you. It's an interesting case, though, because Coast can also bring their own mortars, and I don't know. It's an interesting one. Maybe. Depends on the map for that one. But I would say, even on flat maps, you might get more value from a cannon. It's hard. Again, I might just be speaking to my own bias here, but the mortars is definitely an option you should consider. And especially if you just need like one cheap artillery piece to kind of force your opponent into a weird situation, maybe if they're not expecting it, or yeah, against those targets. It's especially good against archer lines, right? Because if they're going to try and stand and shoot at that mid-range, as long as you're playing up and the archers can't shoot the mortar directly and do a lot of damage to it, shut it down that way, you definitely need to play a little bit forward, which requires a bit of an active defense, but can generate some great value against archer lines as well. So yeah, there's the mortar for you. Kind of had forgotten about it personally, but it's a great unit, and a big shout out to Kafka. That was a great game, man. Definitely kicked my butt, and it was awesome, so thank you. And hopefully y'all enjoyed that. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. See you next time.